Hello, in this video, I will be discussing the French language and regional languages and their relationship to the government. To understand the complexity of French patrimoine and culture, language is one of the best routes to do so. When you think about it, at school, we learn about France and its culture through the language French. For the topic of patrimoine in the AS course, I decided to look into this a little deeper and opened a large can of worms, let's just say. I thought a lot about identity and what makes us who we are. And this reminded me about my grandmother, my French grandmother, and I haven't always felt so sort of in touch and like identify with them so much, my French part of my family, because I am not fluent in French, although I'm trying to do so. And I think it's vital to be completely in touch with your identity is to be fluent in the language and everything. So it all started with a story my mother told me about how my great-great-grandmother, or grand-grand-mamie, was a teacher in a small village in France in the area of Franche-Comté. I'm circling around there. And part of her job description was to prevent the regional dialect, Franc-Comtois, or Franche-Comté as it's called in French, or Patois, as it's called by the government, to sort of take away its name and its uniqueness and its identity. So her job was to prevent the regional dialect to be spoken in schools, and to make sure that French was the only acceptable and respectable language. And because of this, Patois was seen, and is still seen, as the language of the commoners and the illiterate. And this has caused great shame over the generations. Okay, so I did a little digging, and I began to realize what an effect the shame brought about by people like my great-great-grandmother had on language and the regional languages of France. And I looked online and found out the figures. So approximately 1,000 people, only 1,000 people speak Franc-Comtois, the regional language of where my family comes from. And this is a language which is spoken both in France and Switzerland. And this is quite shocking because, as you saw on the map, it's quite a big area of land. And there's barely any information online. The Wikipedia page is pretty sparse. And I was thinking, well, has this happened to all the dialects in France? This is pretty shocking news. So I looked a little further to another language because I thought, okay, I should compare it with something else from the south of France, and it's called Arsenaise, which is a variety of Occitan. So as you can see on the map here, that there are two main groups of languages. There's Languedoc, which is spoken in the north, and the Languedoc, also known as the Occitan languages. Okay, so Arsène, there's another map I'll just show you, is spoken in this tiny little circle here. And I looked online and I found that there are 2,600 speakers, and for such a small area of the country, that's quite a lot, considering that it's not taught in schools or anything like that. And it turns out that the area of Spain called Catalonia has made it an official language because there are speakers of it in Spain as well. And this is quite interesting because you can see that there's an effect where a country has made it official, so it's more valued and there are more speakers because it's more valued and there isn't so much of a shame sort of thing tied around it. And this area has sort of overcome the issues with their education by not overcoming not being able to speak the language of their culture within school, but doing it anyway because of the influence of Spain. And it just shows the effects that making a language official actually has, and the power the government has as well. And it all kind of started in 1880, where education was made compulsory and only French was allowed within the classroom. And for quite some time, the French have been very proud of their language and everything. And there's even like a whole an organization devoted to it called l'Académie Française. And every sort of few years or so, they release a dictionary and they update grammar rules and all that kind of thing. So trying to protect it and prevent it from changing very much from its original form and that kind of thing. And this group has said in the past and still holds this opinion to this day, that French dialects and regional dialects are not of the same quality and do not have the same cultural value, and therefore should not be taught and should not be learnt. And this leads on to what I'm going to talk about next, which is a word from Occitan called la vergogne, and it refers to the effects of various policies of the French government of France, the government of France, on its minorities whose native language was deemed a patois, a Romance language spoken in the country other than the standard French, such as Occitan or the Langue d'Oil. Okay, so this is very interesting because they've labeled the shame, and it's quite impressive to really understand this and confront it properly, which is probably due to the effects of Spain, because they've been able to confront this shame and that kind of thing. So I did a bit more digging, and vergogne is still a very controversial topic in France, and some people claim that this discrimination has never existed, and but others say that this is a example of sanctioned systematic linguicide. Now that's quite a powerful sentence, because linguicide is quite extreme. It means the death of languages, and if a language dies, so does its culture with it, which is a very sad thing. And France is very proud of its culture and protecting it. So why would it ever let this happen? Well, one of the ways linguicide can happen is from top to bottom language death, when a language shift begins in a high-level environment such as the government. So like with this legislation in 1880, making education compulsory, but also making French the only acceptable language, and enforcing this by corporal punishment, so like people getting hit with rulers on their hands, or wearing clogs around their neck on a piece of string, or a horseshoe on a piece of string, or a sign. So huge shame tied to speaking the language of your culture and your identity. And it's proven in figures as well. So in 1860, before schooling was made compulsory, native Occitan speakers represented more than 39% of the whole French population. Now that's massive, that's more than a third, as opposed to 52% of francophones proper, so that means French speakers. Their share of the population declined to 26 to 36% by the late 1920s. And since the end of World War II, it experienced another sharp decline to less than 7% by 1993. And also, so Occitan is the other huge regional language group. And think about all these tiny, weeny little languages that have died out because of this huge decline and because of the legislation that the government has passed. Okay. However, there is hope. I don't want to be too much of a downer. So there's a thing called language revitalization. And in the past, it's been very successful. And one of the greatest examples is Hebrew, which has been completely and 100% revitalized. And from being just a language used in scriptures and in religious ceremonies and temples and that kind of thing, it's now a language that is used in everyday life, and a language spoken by a whole population, the population of Israel, and many other people as well. So that's really impressive, and it shows that things can change, and with the support of governments, things can happen. So another example, which is a bit more close to home, and many of you, will have family who are Welsh as well, is Welsh. And the way that Welsh has been revitalized is by putting it back into schools and everything, and people learning in Welsh schools. And An example of this is Miss Parry, who went to Welsh school. And you think about all these people who go to Welsh schools now, and the people who went to Welsh schools in the past now can speak Welsh. So you have new generations of people, who are more in touch with their culture and where they come from and where their ancestors come from. Another example is Breton, which is a French language. It's quite similar to Cornish. And recently, without much government help at all, it's been able to sort of go back into schools and be taught again. It's really good now. I think there's some areas where most people can speak Breton now, and before it was a dying language. And another example is Manx, which is similarly has been able to be reintroduced into schools in the Isle of Man and all that kind of thing. And I think you can probably think of lots of other examples too, and do some digging. Anyway, right. So I just want to show you on the map how big France is, and also remember that France is not just the country. It is also that there are also overseas territories like Martinique and Guadeloupe and all these different places, which will have their own sort of creoles and languages from before French colonization. But all these places will have their own individual languages. And just think about what if the government actually helped and supported the revitalization of each individual language. How much people will be in touch with their culture and their patrimoine. And patrimoine is a word that's been used a lot by the government, and it's very important to the French identity to be in touch with one's roots and heritage. And so I think language is the best way to do so, because if we let these languages die out, the culture will die out too. Anyway, right, I would like to end on some words from Breton and a few other dialects, but here we go. I think my favorite one is, I'm very food orientated, so it's not surprising, is Queen Amand. I probably completely butchered that, I'm very sorry. And it's a round pastry, which is essentially layers of pastry and butter and sugar. And it's meant to be the fattiest pastry in all of Europe, which is pretty impressive. And it is only found in Mont Saint-Michel, which is a small town or like village on a hill in Bretagne. And when the tide goes up, it's basically in the middle of the sea. So very impressive place. So it's a very special thing, it's a very unique part of French culture, and it has its own unique word in a complete, a very specific language only spoken in that area. So I think it's very important to learn about this. Here we have some examples of Aranese and its comparison to other European language. So if you like languages like me, it's very interesting to compare, because most languages have the same root, and especially in Europe, and it's just very cool because you can see it's very similar. Like for the moon, lua, luna, yuna, lua, lune, luna, moon. It's quite similar. It's very cool. And finally, from Franche-Comté or Franche-Comtoise, here are some words. My favorite, probably my grandma's favorite too, is yoyoter, which is in French to dire des sornettes or dire n'importe quoi. So to tell nonsense. It's quite a good word, yoyoter. And my other favorite word is schnee, which means ball of dust. There's also another word for ball of dust in Franche-Comté, which is, It's mouton. But mouton in French also means sheep. So it's quite funny because a ball of dust is fluffy, so it also looks like a sheep. Anyway, I don't know why they have so many words for balls of dust, but I don't know. There we go. Yeah, I really hope from watching this, you'll talk to some members of your family about languages from where you come from, or I don't know, you could have Welsh or Scottish or Irish ancestors, and it would be interesting if you learned some Gaelic languages and all that kind of thing. or just try and find out more about your cultural identity. It's a very important topic, and it helps just understanding more about yourself to understand where you came from. And in the future, I really hope to become fluent in French and learn some more franc-comtois. And then maybe it'll help me become more in touch with like my French heritage and that kind of thing. So, well, there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.